Hello again, Joe.
Adam, it's been a while.
It has been, but I want to know, what did you have for breakfast this morning?
I had a late breakfast. It was a brunch.
Oh, because you were listening to Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, doing a series of local radio interviews at breakfast time.
It was gripping. I couldn't pull myself away.
Here she is talking to Rima Ahmed on BBC Leeds this morning.
Since Friday, since your Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget, the pound has dropped to a record low. The IMF has said that you should reevaluate your policies, and the Bank of England has had to spend £65 billion to prop up the markets because of what they describe as a material risk. Where have you been?
Well, I think we've got to remember the situation we were facing this winter.
And in this episode of Newscast, we will be getting reaction to that from the imaginary godfather of local radio.
The new Anna Partridge podcast, he does talk a bit about... well, there's actually...
Does he?
Well, he starts dating a woman called Katrina, who he thinks is marvellous, and she has bleached blonde hair and drives a Range Rover. And Truss says... Well, he says, what's she like? And he goes, well, she's a bit like Liz Truss, so I'm meeting her later.
Yeah, Alan Partridge, a.k.a. the comedian, producer, writer, actor Steve Coogan, who's got a new film out, which we'll be asking him about as well. And there's plenty of politics to talk about with other people too on this episode of Newscast.
Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
Hi, it's Joe Coburn, also in the studio.
And it's Chris in the streets in South London. Hello.
Hello.
And making a triumphant return to Thursday night television, although about an hour later than we were used to, is David Dimbleby. Hello.
Hello, good evening.
Lovely to have you here.
Hello, Joe. Nice to see you, Adam.
Just going to ask, are you happy with your chair?
Yeah, my chair's... This is all right, this one. The last one...
Bouncy.
You pull a lever, you disappear from sight, or you hit the ceiling.
I imagine on Question Time it's a top of the range chair.
The Question Time chair I was very picky about. I always had it higher than any of the guests.
Oh, okay.
Deliberately. I mean, I'm quite tall. I won't stand up now. I mean, I'm just under 6 foot. But I realised that if ever you were lower, it was a nightmare because you couldn't actually control people. So
did you take that chair everywhere?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we took the chair everywhere, yes. And chairs and election chairs were very important.
Well, you've got to sit in them for so long.
You've got to sit on them so long. But also that you can, when you get bored, you just pull the lever. I won't do it now. And disappear, and it's a good laugh, you know?
And David, we'll get lots of commentary from you on events this week in a few minutes. But Chris, I just wanted to get your take of what was happening on local radio this morning when Liz Truss did, I think, 8 interviews back to back, and she faced some really, really tough questions and people being very critical of her performance as a result.
Yeah, she really did. And it was a sort of wonderful quirk, really, of the kind of political ecology. I was sitting on the train on the way back from the Labour conference, and BBC Radio Tees last night were tweeting that they had the Prime Minister on this morning. And people were thinking, what? She's disappeared and she's popped up on Radio Tees. Of course, what she was doing was a round of local radio interviews, which happens at this kind of time before the party conferences every single year, and it's been in the diary for ages, probably even before she was Prime Minister. And so, yeah, she gave an hour this morning between 8 and 9, talking to Radio Leeds and Radio Lancashire and Radio Norfolk and various other stations, before she talked to anybody else publicly about what's happened this week. So they got the exclusive, and my goodness, they gave her a hard time on the big national picture, a hard time on disappearing and not being seen in public for the last few days, and then a hard time on the kind of specifics that you or me or Joe could ask about, say, fracking. But you know what, if Graham Liver on Radio Lancashire asks it, where they've done trials and where there were those little shakes, then it's, you know, a little bit harder to grapple with. So yeah, a pretty tough outing for the Prime Minister. After that, she did a shed load of regional television interviews as well. The key thing is, though, the message from her was they're not changing. They are sticking to that budget from last week. They are ploughing on.
And David, a lot of the questions she faced on local radio were about the falling value of the pound against the dollar, the increasing rate that the government was having to pay for its debt, and the intervention of the Bank of England to help pension funds. I mean, you've seen a lot of financial crises over your very, very long career. How does this one fit into some of the older ones?
Well, in an odd way, it's a kind of echo, really, of things that have happened in the past. I mean, I remember when the pound was $2.80 in the late 60s, when Harold Wilson devalued and said it doesn't devalue the pound in your pocket and all that. I remember when Norman Lamont sang in the bath and we pulled out of the ERM and the pound plummeted and interest rates from the Bank of England went to 15%. These things always are like a storm when they happen. And this one is very extraordinary because I think somebody quite astutely said it's as though the government has got its foot on the accelerator, accelerating, and at the very same time the Bank of England's got its foot on the brake. And you know what happens. Have you ever done that in a car when you, by mistake, get your foot on both?
It?
Well, the car comes to a crashing halt.
There's the added twist that there's other bits of the Bank of England that got their foot on another accelerator, but just a smaller one.
Yes, but I do think it is extraordinary. I thought the victory was interesting. Liz Truss becoming Prime Minister, I thought, was quite. We knew her quite well on Question Time over the years, and it was quite an eye-opener when she became Prime Minister.
Why did you say that? And I should make clear that you don't work for the BBC anymore, so you can speak really freely.
Don't hesitate with your interesting
Yes.
Yes.
No, I mean, and Kwasi Kwarteng used to come on, when he was a backbencher, always very, very voluble and very, decisive about what he thought and everything. But I do think, I haven't seen anything quite so... and compared with leaving the RM or the devaluation in the 60s, I haven't seen anything quite so melodramatic as this. It is really,
I think it is. You think it stands out?
Well, I think it stands out because I think what Kwasi Kwarteng announced, was massive change, and this 45% tax dropping to 40 suddenly at a time when people are actually already deciding either to buy a pullover and not turn the heating on, or we can't have hot meals and heat our houses at the same time, and all that's going on. It just seems extraordinary. And, it is a complete shitstorm for people who are actually trying to sell abroad or
You've
buy
definitely
stuff
left
in.
the BBC, haven't you? Language like
We're
that.
after the 9 o'clock. After the
this.
9 o'clock watershed, aren't we? I'm sure it's absolutely fine. Your sort of comment about Liz Truss, interesting, as you said, the leadership contest. I spoke to a couple of Tory MPs who supported Rishi Sunak, who said they think his leadership campaign's ageing rather well. I don't know what you think about whether there's any sort of buyer's remorse or hindsight coming into.
Look, I'm not close enough to the 160,000 people who chose our Prime Minister, which itself is rather weird. Actually, I'm really against that way of choosing the leader of a party, both in the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. I think the MPs who've been elected democratically are the people who should choose who leads the party. I think it's completely crazy, the system that the Tories did to ape Labour, because when Labour sort of said you can all have a vote in the leadership, it's all very democratic like that, Tories said, we're being left behind, we must do the same thing. They introduced this system. It's a lunatic system.
Well, I suppose on the whole, the mandate of her election point, it's very hard, isn't it, for any institution to wind back a mandate. So as much as there is an argument that says let MPs decide, once a party's given it to the membership, to go back to the model of it being decided by MPs for any party, I think is probably quite tricky, because you'd have to make a case about taking power away from people. On the other stuff, I think, what we're going to hear from Kwasi Kwarteng and what we'll hear from Liz Truss, I think, next week at the Conservative conference, is they'll carry on talking about this so-called, and I hate this phrase because it's kind of meaningless, isn't it, supply-side reform. In other words, removing regulations to try and make the economy more dynamic, changing ratios for childcare in England so more children can be looked after by a single member of staff in a nursery, planning reform in England, which, by the way, as we know, ran into a huge amount of trouble for the Conservatives when they tried to do it under Boris Johnson. So I think we'll hear quite a lot of that, and they'll carry on making the case that the supply side, in inverted commas, element of this change, this whole new approach from Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, is just as important as what the economists would say is the fiscal side, the tax side, which was obviously front and centre at the end of last week. And those in government think it's that bit that was really spooking the markets, and they kind of undersold the bit about the supply side stuff. So I think that's what we're going to hear. I think the big question, though, is that they've got this date penciled in, or not penciled in, inked in now, almost 2 months away at the tail end of November for this kind of fiscal plan, as they call it. Can they wait that long if the markets continue to be turbulent, interest rates go up, which I think is inevitable, and politically things just get very, very tricky for the government?
I'm also intrigued over the years of Question Time and those panels, because I have a panel show, watching politicians change, evolve from the parties. In your mind, has there been a sea change in the quality or the standard or the type of politicians that we have from all the parties?
Yes, but I'm loath to say, they're just not as good as they used to be, which is the way people look at it. But in a sense, they're different from what they used to be, because I think because of a lot of it is because of social media and the pressures now of being a politician and the constant need to explain, and then you get attacked immediately. You've said something, and then you have spads saying, "Oh, don't go on Question Time. There's nothing in it for you." That didn't happen in the past. The big beasts of politics, the people that I used to think, great, they're on this week. Ken Clarke, Tony Benn's on. Michael Heseltine, Shirley Williams. They'd say boo to the goose. And now everybody sort of seems to be completely petrified about opening their mouths, because anything you say now is round the world, in seconds, and you're under attack, and your family's under attack, and you're being threatened and insulted and derided. So I think it's not attracting as a profession quite the same kind of person, caliber of person even, that went into it in the 20 years after the war, for instance.
David, thank you very much. Could have chatted to you for hours, but we don't have hours because we've got our next guest patiently waiting to take your place. It's the Conservative MP for Hitchin and Harpenden, Bim Afolami. Bim, welcome back to Newscast.
Hello, how are you?
How are you?
Don't look at me like that. No one's died.
No,
don't think so.
No,
okay. Well, no, it's not been an easy week to be a Conservative, has it?
No.
I mean, people have been giving you grief from all quarters. So it's the IMF, the bond market.
Who's on your side?
My family? No. Look, it hasn't been an easy week to be a Conservative MP, but it frankly hasn't been an easy week to be a British citizen. I think that what's more important than the Conservative Party is the country, and a lot of people were frankly scared about some of the really volatile movements in the markets, and I think that is something that I feel very deeply. And as any MP of whatever colour should always try and avoid those sorts of things happening to constituents. So I think we've got to think very practically about reassuring people, and a big part of that is, of course, reassuring the markets, so that we don't get those sort of outcomes in the future.
So have they been reckless then? Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss, have they been reckless?
No, I don't think they've been reckless, because I know how much work, goes into these things, and how much preparation, how much thinking they'd have done. But it's obvious that the markets did not take this well. And from my reading of it and speaking to various people in the city who have been actively looking at this and in many cases actually participating in it, they felt that it was that worry about inflation and the weak pound against the dollar, which is the thing they've been really worried about with the UK. And it's really important that people understand why a weak pound matters, because most things, indeed almost everything that's global, is priced in dollars. So even if you're buying something in the UK, quite often the cost of that thing in pounds is derived from what that is in dollars. And so if we have a weak pound in comparison to the dollar, it means we're all getting poorer. And so that contributes to inflation.
But so when you were talking to people like currency traders and fund managers, which sounds like you've been doing this week, did any of them say, "Oh, and the stuff that you guys did on Friday last week contributed to that"?
Well, obviously they were reacting to a specific thing, which was the mini budget or whatever we've agreed to call it. I mean, that's obviously true. The big movements in the market were precipitated by this thing, but also it's also true to say, and I've heard certain of my colleagues say this, and this is right, that internationally there's a huge amount of volatility going on. We've got a lot of worries in the international markets. You have a lot of debt, not just in the UK, but across all the G7. You have a war going on. You have energy problems. There was that gas leakage or something happened in the pipeline Nord Stream between Russia and Eastern Europe. There's a lot going on that people are worried about.
Yeah, Bim, I thought I'd ask about all things, the kind of polls, how the public, it would appear, are responding to what's happening at the moment. There's this new YouGov poll for the Times just out, giving Labour a 33-point lead, 54 for Labour, just 21 for the Conservatives. Now, I should insert a caveat. Whenever there is a poll that seems grabby and makes big headlines, the caveat should be even bigger, because if it's an outlier, it might just be wrong. And there are two other polls that I'll just mention today. One from Kantar, 39 for Labour, 35 for the Conservatives. One from Redfield and Wilton, 46 for Labour, 29 for the Conservatives. That's a massive lead and matches a YouGov poll, a similar lead of, 17 points from the other day. I mean, look, politics is a difficult business, isn't it? You get short-term contracts from the electorate. Things can be very volatile. I just wonder, when you guys see this sort of stuff, and then you've got your conference in just a couple of days, would I be right to predict that there might be quite a few Conservative MPs who don't fancy that trip to Birmingham next week, who might be spending a lot more time in their constituencies?
Well, I mean, look, we'll see. And there's no point saying politicians don't look at polls. That's when you know a politician's lying to you, by the way, is when they say they never look at polls. Of course we all do. And of course, when polls are good for your party, you celebrate them and send them round. When they're bad, you sort of hide quietly in a room. I think, going back to what I was saying at the beginning, it is clear that we need to show the public and the markets that buy British government debt, of which we've got a lot, that we can be trusted with the economy, in particular, bringing down inflation. That means we need to bring down these high prices that we've got all over the place, but also over the medium term, making sure that we can get more growth in the economy. And it's something that I don't think was focused on enough by anybody, though there are some things in the growth plan that the Chancellor put out, and getting the government working more effectively.
But what are you going to do? What is the government? What should they do to bring down inflation?
It's a big question. There are a couple of things. The first is something we have done, which is the energy intervention. What that does is it limits inflation by quite a lot. That's the first thing. Second thing we need to do is we do need to bear down on spending. Now, that means on the tax side, we've got to be really careful about tax cuts and make sure that the tax cuts that we're giving generate the most in economic activity so that you get those back in taxes.
And the tax cuts announced on Friday, do they do that? Do they meet your requirements?
Some of them do. Some of them I would have made different choices. So I think the basic rate was really important.
Yeah.
Very strongly support that.
Yeah.
I think the 45p, though I support it, if you're looking for priorities, I would have focused on people earning maybe between £35,000 and £80,000 because they've got quite a high, what they call propensity to spend. They spend more of their extra money when they get it.
Yeah.
For me, I would have focused on that. I'd have looked at VAT as well.
Will you be showing the country as a government and a party that you're doing those things if you fail to uprate pensions and benefits in line with inflation?
I don't know the numbers on that, so I'd have to. I mean, I can guess it's quite a
10%?
large number. No, I just don't know. But it's obviously going to be a very big call because if you don't do that, the question is, what else are you doing where you're making other choices?
Yeah, but this is. I'm sorry. This is what I just don't get about politics, right? So you supported Rishi Sunak all summer. Rishi Sunak said, if you do X and Y, A and B will happen. The government has just done X and Y, A and B has happened, and you're here defending it, even though we know you think it's bad because you signed up to the guy who said this would be bad if this happened.
I wasn't defending anything. I was explaining how I saw how things were working.
So you're not defending the government?
No. I didn't come here to defend the government. I'm not a member of the government. I came here to explain how I see the situation, and I've explained it in a, admittedly, perhaps too nuanced a way for some, but I've tried to present it in a fair way, as I see it. And there are bits of it that I've liked, as I've said, and there are bits of it that I'd have done differently.
Well, Bim, thank you very much for accepting our invite to Newscast today. And it is we appreciate you talking us through what is going on and how it works and the nuances that maybe sometimes are a bit absent in some of the louder commentary about what's going on.
Well, it is a pleasure as always.
And Chris, bye to you too. See you in Birmingham for the Tory Party conference.
See you in Birmingham. Cheers, Adam. Cheers, Joe.
Bye.
As promised, we're now joined by Steve Coogan, who's got a new film out next week called The Lost King, which is all about finding the remains of Richard III in a car park in Leicester. Hello, Steve.
Hello.
we're going to talk about the film plenty, but I just wanted to get your reaction to just all the stuff that's been happening in politics and the economy the last couple of days.
In 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, I do think it's. I'm baffled, even from a strategic point of view, irrespective of the sort of ethics of it, to give tax cuts to the 1% in the hope that there'll be a palpable, tangible trickle-down effect to lower middle-income people who will then spend that money and feel their standard of living improve, and all that's going to happen within 2 years. I just find that's pie in the sky.
Do you think it's because they just thought this is going to be our only chance to put in place over the next 18 months, 2 years, the sorts of things we've dreamt of doing?
I think if you're talking from a sort of a tactical point of view, you might think that we're probably going to lose the election anyway, so why don't we roll the dice with something really radical and see if it works? But to me, it's sort of they're trying to fast track an experiment they had 30 years to play out. That Milton Friedman economics that was sort of, we realised, worked a bit until it didn't.
I mean, I'm not going to probe into your finances, but I'm guessing like a big movie star like you'll benefit from the 45p rate going.
I've never tried to squirrel away my tax in offshore accounts or anything like that. My accountant is annoyingly uncreative.
Second. But are you going to be one of those then that can spend that money to create that growth in the economy?
I do spend my money. I don't save a lot of it up. I spend it on things and sometimes people and all the rest of it. But I don't think that's going to have a tangible effect in such a short amount of time. I suppose there is a slight possibility. It's playing for high stakes that it might work. I mean, I think that's what they're doing. They think there might be that sort of siege mentality of we've got nothing to lose. That's the only way I can explain why.
You've been a big Labour supporter in the past. How do you think Labour did with their conference this week? I don't know if it's something that you were tuning into.
I was, I sort of swing between very left wing and just slightly left wing, depending on what mood I'm in. And I thought, I understand the game they're playing. I think they have to be very careful not to spook traditional Labour voters. He's got to be all things to all men. I mean, it did make me laugh when Frankie Boyle said if a Keir Starmer ran at a pigeon, it wouldn't move.
We did the whole section, of course, on music because we had God Save the King for the first time, opening the Labour Party conference, as well as the red flag, of course, ending at the end. I always love it when people don't know all the words and they're quickly shuffling through looking for them.
King segue, though, Joe.
Did you like that?
Yeah, so The Lost King is out next Friday. I'd say it's probably the best archaeology film since Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
It's cheaper.
Yeah, I can imagine.
A lot more Leicester in it.
Yeah, a lot more of Leicester. That's one of the big selling points. Is that imagine Indiana Jones with less action and more of Leicester.
Oh, it sounds great though.
It's a great story. I mean, it's not. It's partly about the discovery of a dead king, but what drew me to the story wasn't that part of it, the historical part of it. It was the story of Philippa Langley and her personal journey, her struggle, her quest to find the body of a dead king, which is what she set about doing. And the Richard III of it is sort of like a Trojan horse for telling her story, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, so a lot of it is about Richard III is unfairly portrayed. Everyone thinks they know him. Actually, that's all a set of myths by people with vested interests who wanted to portray him in a certain way. I just wondered, is that maybe how you've felt at various points, being a public figure, where everyone thinks they know who you are, but actually...
I think that what I'm pointing at in this film, which is something that I, as a deep-seated belief that I have, is there is a sort of what I would call, certainly Philippa Langley was subject to this, which is a kind of an elitist establishment that disenfranchises those who haven't gone through the same process. And I felt that in the past, certainly when I was involved in Hacked Off, there was a little bit of, and this is cross-political, of who the hell does he think he is?
Really?
Having opinions, this provincial polytechnic boy.
All the peas.
So I do think there's a bit of that going on, and something that I gravitate towards. I mean, sort of, I've not got people say we've got a chip on your shoulder. I've got chips, fish, and mushy peas on my shoulder. So I tell people, but I do think there's something to be said for not the normal kind of Goliath type institutions which are pernicious, like big multinational companies, but there's a certain sort of intellectual elitism that is at play that disenfranchises certain people, or autodidacts who've sort of learnt stuff along the way.
Although the University of Leicester, who you portray as as the baddies in this film, they've hit back quite kind of strongly, say it's not accurate how you've portrayed them. What's going on there? Okay, right. Well, put simply, they started it because 10 years ago, Philippa Lang, the central plank of their claim is that they found that a group of academics from Leicester University led the search for the body of Richard III. That, in my opinion, is not true. Oh. The search for Richard III was led by a woman, one woman by herself called Philippa Langley, who was a housewife from Edinburgh. Now, as an academic institution, if you acknowledge that, it makes you look rather foolish because, and I often use the comparison with Davos Sobel's Longitude, where the Royal Society and the combined minds of Oxford and Cambridge couldn't acknowledge the fact that a Yorkshire clockmaker had beaten them at their own game. There's definitely something like that at play here, because she did her research, she found where she thought the body was, she raised the money, she in fact got permission to a licence to do the dig from Leicester City Council. She hired Leicester University Archaeological Society as the client. She was the client. She raised the money. She instigated the dig. She told them where to dig. All these things that have been relegated to footnotes in the Leicester University's account. And when I spoke to Philippa, she said to me she felt marginalised as an amateur. We're speaking to you on basically probably the greatest day in local radio history, Liz Truss's morning interview round with all the BBC local radio stations. As the creator of one of the greatest local radio broadcasters, what do you think about what happened this morning?
It's funny because Alan it would be a fully signed up member of the Liz Truss fan club because she ticks all his boxes, but. You know, he would have loved to have gotten the sort of the in-depth sort of 45-minute exclusive.
But do you believe in the power of local radio?
Yeah, I do actually. I'm a big admirer of it. Yes, of course, you know, we poke fun at it, but you know, just because you poke fun at something doesn't mean you don't love it. Yeah, this is one of the things people often find. This is sort of this polarized world we live in. You can mock the things you actually love, and we do that in relationships, in family. You know, that's how the British show affection. You know, they take the mickey. Yeah. Yeah, I think it is good, and I kind of quite like that. It's sort of almost like in a volatile world, local radio seems to be unchanging.
It's reassuring, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And also, Liz Truss is a Norfolk MP, so she'd be on Norfolk Digital every week. Yeah. No, that's what I told you. I mean, in fact, the new Alan Partridge podcast, he does talk a bit about. Well, there's actually he? Well, he starts dating a woman called Katrina, who he thinks is marvellous, and she has bleached blonde hair and drives a Range Rover. And Truss-esque?
He says, "What's she like?" And he goes, "Well, she's a bit like Liz Truss, so I'm meeting her later." And that's it. That's his. Yeah.
Alan Partridge and Liz Truss.
Yeah. Brilliant, Steve. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And there's a statement from the University of Leicester responding to some of the things in Steve's film. They say, "We appreciate that while The Lost King is based on real events, it's a work of fiction, and recollections will vary from various people of what happened during such an incredibly exciting moment in history. It's our view," they say, "that the portrayal of the University of Leicester's role in the project is far removed from the accurate work that took place. We worked closely with Philippa Langley throughout the project, and she was not sidelined by the university." And that film is out next Friday, so people can decide. And you can take a view of what you've heard on this episode of Newscast, because that's it.
Well, my view, for what it's worth, it was brilliant.
Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.